Recording engineering. In recording engineering, there's all sorts of different fields, and I wanted to briefly go through a couple of these things. You know, you've got record making, you've got film and TV scoring, you've got gaming, you've got multimedia, you've got webcasting, you've got all of these avenues where, you know, you can actually utilize recording arts. It's not only to be used for making music, which I bet you 90% of you are here because of that. But the truth is that there are so many avenues to use recordings and recording arts, especially today, more than ever. We discussed a little bit about filmmaking, but let's get a little tiny bit more detailed just for a few minutes so that you understand on every phase, an audio person is essential. So it's not just, you know, the filming of the film isn't made by just taking a camera and filming some actors acting, right? So let's just say we're going to go film a scene at the beach and there's two people walking down the beach talking, right? So you've got cameras. You maybe have 3 different cameras from different angles following them along as they're doing their conversation, but you've got a sound guy there holding a microphone out of the picture that's capturing the dialogue that's being said. That's basically a temporary audio track. Then the person making the film goes in and edits these 3 cameras together, different viewpoints, and so on and so forth, listening to this temporary dialogue and whatever else the microphone's picking up. It's picking up the cars driving down the 101 and the water splashing against the sand and the footsteps and the clothes rustling and the breathing and the talking and everything that's going on right there. The birds, the dogs barking, across a mile away. The microphone's picking all that up. And it's not quality enough to be actually used in the film. So after they cut the visuals, then they give the temporary cuts to the audio people. Then the audio people have to recreate every sound that's on that temporary, even more than what's on the temporary audio track. So they go in for dialogue replacement. So the actors come back, watch themselves saying the lines that they just said, hearing the temporary audio that they did at the time when they did their acting, and then they have to recreate that mood with the audio in a studio. That takes some, recreating a mood like that's very difficult. And many times you have to take multiple takes so that it actually synchronizes with the visual and all this kind of stuff. And now, of course, with Pro Tools, you can time stretch, you can time compress, you can change pitch, you can do all sorts of stuff that back in the day you couldn't do. It all had to be done on tape. So that's dialogue replacement. Then there's sound effects. Or let's call it Foley. So, you're walking on the beach, there's footsteps, there's water splashing, there's wind going, there's all of these different sounds that are happening that have to be created one by one and mixed together against the picture so it looks real. Then, not just Foley, there's sometimes, let's say it's a film where, you've got Space Invaders. Now you've got sound design of a spaceship floating in and creating sounds that we've never heard before, right? So that's a guy sitting in a computer watching the film, creating something that looks realistic and it sounds cool with the visuals. So all this stuff is created, all usually in different studios by different people. The Foley artists, they're real artists to create this stuff. I don't know if anybody's understood what Foley is, but at Disney and Warner Brothers, they've got a Foley stage that's huge because if you want water noises, they've got an Olympic-sized pool to create it. They've got pits with sand and gravel and grass and, all the different textures and sounds that they can create. I mean, it's a real art form to create. Back in the day when I was younger, I used to do jingles, and we used to do McDonald's jingles. And you'd be surprised what really sounds like French fries going into the fryer. It's like we used to take heads of lettuce and crack them open, and it sounds like it's going into the fryer. So all these kinds of things, these fight scenes that, they take pieces of meat and hit them, and it sounds like you're hitting a human, So all of these sounds have to be created, and Foley artists have spent a lifetime figuring out what sounds like this and looks good against picture, and the real good ones are pretty amazing. They get paid very well. So, and the guy recording it also has to be able to do this very well and understand how to make it sound right. If you ever noticed when you're watching a film and there's a party in a house over here and you're standing outside, what that sound sounds like, that's all created by an engineer. So, and a sound designer. And then, of course, you walk into the party, how the sound changes. So it sounds and looks realistic. All these things are pretty complex parts of making a movie other than just the filming. Filming's complicated enough, but the audio yields a lot of jobs for people that actually love recording and are in recording. But that's just film. I didn't even get to any of the other uses for audio besides music, of course. I mean, I love music, so I'm involved in music. But at one point in my career, I actually spent a lot, because I'm an electrical engineer, I spent a lot of time restoring historical tapes. So I'd restore them and transfer them into a digital format. Some of the tapes that I actually saved from deterioration were lectures by Frank Lloyd Wright, Albert Einstein, those kinds of lectures that actually get recorded at universities. There's oral histories. Every big company does oral history. The Getty, for example, did oral histories with J. Paul Getty's attorney, his recollections of what J. Paul Getty was like. And this is all historical information that goes into libraries. Architects, do oral histories about their career. These things get translated now into MP3s so that you can go online and you can stream them and hear the actual, if you're an architecture student, wouldn't it be great to hear the guy that developed the design for the Twin Towers, or the guy that developed a building that you're studying, the guy in his own words talking about his own designs. So these kinds of things for historical preservation, really, really important. Like I said, it's like taking a step back in time when you can hear somebody lecture, Albert Einstein lecture on his theories. Actually hear his voice and how he expressed what he was thinking is a lot different than just reading it. So we're going to focus in this class, obviously, on the recording process centered around music and music production. That's what I do, but don't forget, if you're interested in recording, you find it fascinating, there's hundreds of ways that it's used and hundreds of ways that you can get involved. So post-production, we discussed this briefly about sweetening voiceovers, pre-dubbing, overdubbing, creating sound for film. Recording studios traditionally consist of several rooms: the control room, the live room or the recording room where the musicians stand, isolation booths where you can isolate sounds and keep them separated from others, which obviously with microphones and electronics you can keep sounds isolated so that you can really have separation. So when you can mix at a later time and not be hampered by sound bleed of other elements. If you're all standing in one rehearsal room, you put up one mic and you get what you get in terms of the blend of the instruments. And then some recording studios have a machine room. This is the basic setup of the basic studios. So I think I have a couple slides here that'll show you some of the more famous rooms in town. So the control room is where the engineer works. Obviously the console of speakers, the effects equipment, the recording interfaces. Live room is where the musicians stand. It's larger space, usually acoustically flexible. What I mean that is, in this room you look around here, right? The acoustic ceiling is to help absorb what I'm saying so it doesn't reflect off the floor and ceiling and create reverb and sound bouncing around, so it would be less audible and understood what I say. These pads here are puffy pads that actually do sound dampening. There's a soundboard underneath this, so it helps with the acoustics of the room. If none of this was here and the ceiling was drywall and the floor was tile, it would be like an echo chamber in here. So the sound energy that I'm creating would bounce off the walls like a billiard ball until it was unintelligible what I was saying. So like a gymnasium sounds. You scream in a gymnasium, you hear all the reverb in the room. So most studio rooms where the musicians stand have flexible sonic. So one room that I worked in had puffy pads that you could flip around, and it was wood on one side and absorbing on the other side. Sometimes you can move around things. You can put more move around panels with carpeting so it absorbs sound and doesn't reflect, and sometimes you want it to be reflective. So all of these kinds of things, the engineer can decide how he wants the room to sound. The sight lines are usually from the control room to the musicians. Everybody has visuals all the time. In fact, today I was working with a keyboard player that actually was the arranger and the keyboard player from Earth, Wind & Fire. He was playing the organ in the other room, and I was watching him because every time he'd go like this, I knew that he made a mistake, and I'd stop. I go, okay, where do you want to go back in? So instead of him going, stop, 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 I got to overdub, I just watch his physical, his body language and know what he was doing. So there's a nonverbal communication going on between the engineer and the musicians at all times. You're always watching each other and understanding what's going on with the sound. Machine room, climate controlled, physically close to the control room. For tape machines, computers, console power supplies, projection rooms if you've got a projector that's going to make noise, especially if it's a room where you're doing dialogue replacement. Usually have a projection of a huge screen so the actors can actually see their lip movement and really recreate what they did. And it's mainly meant to keep the ambient noise of the machines out of the listening area and out of the performing area, and it's also for better electrical and better air conditioning. In fact, this has happened in many of these small studios that I've worked in. They didn't have enough money for separate air conditioning systems, so they'd have the thermostat in the control room with the equipment in the control room. The equipment would generate heat, so naturally the air conditioning would go on to keep the control room at a better temperature for the equipment and for the humans. Unfortunately, the same air conditioning was going into the musicians' room. These guys out here would be like freezing, right? They'd be wearing coats. So and then if they were comfortable, it was too hot in here. It was like a sauna. So usually you have a separate air conditioning system for both areas or all three areas. And they're all separately controlled.